Can a soul be shattered one moment and invited into the heavens the next? That's the paradox at the heart of the Miraj story. One night, after being pelted with stones and insults in the Valley of If, Prophet Muhammad took shelter in a quiet orchard. Bloodied and alone, he raised a prayer not of vengeance, but of surrender. If you are not angry with me, then I do not mind. A moment so raw, so human, that it echoes across centuries as the epitome of vulnerability meeting trust. This wasn't just another trial. At 50 years old, he had buried his wife Khadija, lost his protective uncle Abu Lib, and faced a city that mocked every word he preached. It was a point of collapse, yet that is exactly where the ascension began. The Quran offers a subtle clue. Indeed, with hardship comes ease. Quran 94:5-6. Notice how it doesn't promise ease after hardship, but with it. The ease was already woven into the pain, waiting to be seen, waiting to be received. And then, like a cracked opening in the night sky, came the Isra, the sudden, miraculous journey from Mecca to Jerusalem. But that was only the beginning. What followed was the Miraj, a vertical journey beyond space and time, ascending through the seven heavens. But this wasn't just a physical movement. It was, in the words of scholar Houston Smith, a sacred narrative with two layers, outer travel and inner awakening. That's where our journey begins, too. Over the next few moments, we're not just recounting what the prophet saw. We're decoding a cosmic script, one that blends astrophysics, mysticism, psychology, and timeless ethics. Because the Miraj isn't just about where the prophet went. It's about what that journey means for us today. About the science behind time bending and the soul science of revelation. About why a creature called Al-Burak matters more than we think. And what happens when you stand at the very edge of divine presence, at Sidrat al-Muntaha, and still carry mercy in your voice. This is not mythology. This is not allegory. This is a real event with real implications, explained through real references, from lesser-known works like Journeys to Heaven and Hell, Tours of the Afterlife in the early Islamic world, to spiritual texts that have echoed similar experiences across traditions. So ask yourself this before we go further. What if your lowest moment was the very crack through which light could pour in? The dark night algorithm. Why constellation requires collapse? Why is it that before the heavens opened, the world seemed to shut down around him? The story of Miraj doesn't begin in the stars. It begins in a place so low, it hardly seems divine. The TAFE incident wasn't just a historical moment. It was an emotional implosion. Imagine a prophet of mercy, exhausted from grief, walking miles just to find a sliver of hope, only to be driven out by children throwing stones. No one came to his aid. His feet bled, yet he didn't curse the people. He turned inward and upward. What happened that night is what trauma psychologists call a liminal breakdown, a moment when the self fractures just enough to allow something far greater in. Judith Butler, in her Ethics of Vulnerability, argues that it is precisely in our exposed, unguarded moments that the divine or the ethical often touches us. The prophet's collapse wasn't weakness. It was a psychic softening, a doorway to spiritual emergence. And here's something rarely mentioned. The Miraj didn't come as a reward for strong dawn numbers or political success. In fact, it came when Islam looked socially fragile, even isolated. After years of courageous economic boycott and psychological siege, the prophet's community was not expanding. It was retreating. But neuroscience tells us something important here. Social isolation, especially prolonged, can alter the brain's perception. It heightens visionary receptivity. This is not speculation. It's supported by transpersonal psychology, which studies altered states of consciousness, and the work of HLD. Katz in Journeys to Heaven and Hell. He explores how pre-modern Islamic texts often place the visionary journey right after a cataclysmic emotional event. Sound familiar? This isn't about fabricating meaning after the fact. This is about the anatomy of revelation. Divine contact doesn't always arrive when we're at our best. It often interrupts us at our breaking point. The Prophet Muhammad wasn't given the Miraj in a palace. He was given it in the fallout of public humiliation. And that shift from collapse to ascension mirrors a deeper algorithm embedded in spiritual history. Just as a seed must split to grow, the soul often awakens in the ruin of its expectations. The lesson? Consolation does not float gently down like feathers. It erupts through the fault lines of human sorrow. And Miraj is the most profound case study of that eruption. So next time life feels like it's closing in, remember, you may be standing right at the door of a spiritual portal where even despair is sacred. Burak and relativity, riding beyond space-time. How can a journey of hundreds of miles across deserts and dimensions happen in what seemed like a blink? That's the question that has puzzled both believers and skeptics for centuries. The Al-Burak, often painted as a mythical creature, was the Prophet Muhammad's companion on the first leg of this miraculous journey, from the sacred mosque in Mecca to Masjid Alak in Jerusalem. But Al-Burak wasn't just transportation. It was the symbol of time and space bending to the call of divine command. Classical Hadith literature never describes Al-Burak as a mule-horse hybrid. That's a later mischaracterization. Instead, early Islamic texts describe a radiant creature, larger than a donkey, smaller than a mule, and incredibly fast, able to reach the farthest horizon in a single stride. Dr. Islam Daya's 2019 research in the Al-Burak, its origins and symbolism, reveals that early Muslims did not see this being as mere folklore. They saw it as a representation of space-time pliability, centuries before Einstein formalized it. In fact, what the Prophet experienced on Al-Burak eerily resembles what modern physics calls the twin paradox, a scenario in Einstein's theory of relativity where time slows for a traveler moving at near-light speed. In the Miraj, the Prophet traverses galaxies, receives revelation, meets with prophets, and returns to his bed, all in what appeared to be less than a night. From a scientific perspective, this collapses our ordinary assumptions of chronological time. Sam Harris, though not a believer in miracles, has written about the illusion of linear time, noting that consciousness itself is not bound by the clock. The Miraj proves that point with striking clarity. This is not science fiction. This is sacred metaphysics. From the lens of Islamic cosmology, time is not linear, it's relational. Ibn Arabi, centuries ago, spoke of spiritual ascension as traveling without movement. And now quantum physicists talk about wormholes, shortcuts through space-time that may, in theory, allow instantaneous travel across vast distances. So what Al-Burak really represents is a metaphysical vehicle. Not a Pegasus from a fairy tale, but a sign. A message to humanity that the universe is more flexible than we think, and consciousness, especially prophetic consciousness, can bend the very fabric of existence. When viewed through this lens, the night journey isn't an escape from the world. It's an invitation to rethink what's possible within it. Masjid Alak, synapse of 124,000 prophets. Why Jerusalem? Why Masjid Alak is the chosen launch point into the seven heavens? Before the Prophet Muhammad ascended through the celestial realms, he arrived in Jerusalem to lead all the past prophets, Adam, Ibrahim, Musa, Thawith Makron, and others, in a prayer that took place in unity, silence, and transcendence. But this wasn't just a scene of spiritual nostalgia. It was a metaphysical handover. A gathering that marked the culmination of centuries of prophecy, converging into one final transmission. Ken Wilber's integral theory helps us understand this moment with stunning clarity. In his model of holons, every part contains the whole within it while still being a part of something greater. Alak, in that moment, became the holonic hub, the spiritual brainstem where every prophetic neuron connected, transmitting the entire legacy of divine guidance to the seal of prophets. This was not random location selection. Jerusalem, long known as a sacred axis in Judaism and Christianity, now expanded its role as the central nervous point in Islam's ascension narrative. There's more. A lesser-known yet remarkable source, Prayer and Prophethood, an early Islamic liturgy by Devin J. Stewart, 2017, sheds light on the liturgical function of that gathering. According to Stewart, the two-rakah prayer the Prophet led was not just symbolic. It reflected an actual liturgy of succession, an embodied act in which spiritual authority, insight, and burden were transferred. The prayer was not only ritual, it was revelation in motion. In that moment, Prophet Muhammad did not just lead in prayer. He stepped into a collective legacy, not as a break from the past, but as its most complete reflection. Think of it as ethical and spiritual gravity pulling all prophethood into a singular point. Marcus Aurelius once said, "What we do now echoes in eternity." The echo at Alak was the echo of every prophetic voice singing in harmony before the final ascent. Modern neurophilosophy, interestingly, also speaks of synaptic convergence, a moment when multiple inputs meet at one neuron to trigger a unified output. That is precisely what happened in Alak. Every prophetic mission, every divine message, every fragment of moral light converged in one human being, ready to ascend. It was the start of the seven heavens, but also the moment when spiritual history, across millennia, briefly stood still in prayer. Meeting Dam Evolution, Archetype and the Shadow. Why is the first stop in the heavens a meeting with Adam? Why not a higher prophet or a dazzling angelic choir? The answer isn't just symbolic. It's psychological, spiritual, and deeply human. When Prophet Muhammad meets Adam in the first heaven, he sees a figure who smiles to his right and weeps to his left. He smiles for his righteous descendants, and he weeps for those who go astray. That moment isn't just about Adam, it's about us. About what it means to be human. To hold both joy and sorrow at once. This image of Adam mirrors what Carl Jung described as the shadow archetype, the part of the psyche that contains the things we repress, deny, or ignore. Adam weeping and smiling simultaneously is the integration of light and shadow. It's a message that divine proximity doesn't erase our complexity, it reveals it. According to Daniel Goleman's research in social intelligence, our brains are hardwired for empathic resonance. The prophet was shown a cosmic expression of empathy. Adam's joy activated the brain's reward circuits. His grief mirrored our pain pathways. The spiritual message is subtle but powerful. Being in heaven doesn't mean forgetting the world. It means feeling it more fully. Benjamin Abrahamov, in his profound book The Adamic Self in Islamic Philosophy, explores how early Muslim thinkers like Al-Farabi and Mullah Adr saw Adam not just as the first human, but as the archetype of self-awareness. He represents both the ascent and descent of the soul. Adam knew paradise and then exile. He touched divine light and then wrestled with earthly weight. That's why he was the one to greet the prophet at the first heaven. Because before climbing toward unity, one must reckon with duality. And let's not forget the evolutionary lens. From a broader perspective, Adam can also be seen as humanity's original imprint, the first emergence of consciousness capable of reflection, remorse, and moral choice. Whether one interprets him literally or symbolically, the encounter tells us something essential about our nature. We are being stretched between two poles, sainthood and stumbling, revelation and regression. So the merge begins not with glory, but with a reminder, a mirror. A man who fell, rose, and still aches for those who remain behind. It's a call to see our own shadows not as stains, but as signposts. Because even in the highest realms, what makes us human is never discarded. It's honored. The zodiacal ladder, prophets of the spheres. Why are the prophets placed in different heavens, as if arranged in layers of a cosmic ladder? What secret is hidden in their celestial sequence? As the prophet Muhammad ascends through the seven heavens, he meets different prophets, each residing in a distinct sphere. But this isn't just a tour through heavenly apartments. It's a carefully ordered ascent through spiritual archetypes that reflect qualities within every human soul. In the third heaven, he meets Yusuf, the embodiment of beauty and harmony. Associated with Venus in Islamic cosmology, Yusuf represents not only physical beauty, but also the kind that softens hearts and heals wounds. Beauty in this sense isn't cosmetic, it's a moral magnetism. Then there's Idris, encountered in the fourth heaven, long connected with Mercury, the planet of intellect and swift knowledge. Idris, the ancient sage, becomes the figure of sacred science, wisdom, and spiritual technology. Each prophet on this journey correlates with a different cosmic principle. Musa, dwelling in the sixth heaven, is linked with Jupiter, law, justice, leadership. He represents the ethical spine of civilization. Ibrahim, in the seventh, aligns with Saturn, the planet of patience, contemplation, and endurance. The final threshold before the lot tree is not guarded by the strongest, but by the most steadfast. This mapping of the heavens finds resonance in medieval Islamic astronomy, especially in the Book of Fixed Stars by Al-Sufi. He didn't just chart constellations, he revealed a sacred geography of the sky, where moral and cosmic order mirrored each other. Islamic scholars didn't see the stars as distractions. They saw them as divine metaphors, visible verses pointing upward and inward at once. Modern thinkers like Cornel West, who speaks often of revolutionary love, help us reframe these prophets not as distant legends but as ethical constellations, bright figures arranged across history to guide us through darkness. Their placement in the heavens shows us something profound. Spiritual evolution isn't linear, it's layered. It moves in orbits, not straight lines. These prophetic encounters were more than greetings. They were checkpoints of the soul, markers along the path of ascension. Each heaven wasn't just higher, it was deeper. Deeper into discipline, beauty, intellect, empathy, and selflessness. The prophet's journey through them wasn't just for him. It's a map for us, a spiritual astrology written not in horoscopes, but in lived character and ascending ethics. Sidrat al-Muntaha, the neural tree line of perception. Where does human perception end and divine mystery begin? That boundary has a name in Islamic cosmology, Sidrat al-Muntaha, the lot tree of the utmost limit. It is the final point, the neural edge of creation beyond which no creature, angel or human, can pass. When Prophet Muhammad reached this sublime marker, even Jibril, the angel of revelation, paused. "If I go further," he said, "I will burn." That single line has haunted mystics and philosophers alike. What kind of light scorches even angels? But Sidrat al-Muntaha isn't just a location. It's a metaphysical concept, an inflection point where consciousness meets its ceiling. In Rupert Spira's non-dual philosophy, awareness can observe everything but not itself. It is both the lens and the limit. Likewise, the lot tree is where creation's awareness halts, not because of incapacity, but because of design, a kind of sacred firewall. The prophet described its leaves as massive, its colors shifting beyond human description. Today, many researchers who study altered states of consciousness have noted a fascinating overlap. In Islam and the Destiny of Man, Guy Eaton observes how the prophet's descriptions of Sidrat resonate with DMT-induced visions, fractals, geometric bloomings, non-Euclidean transformations. This doesn't reduce the experience to mere neurochemistry. Rather, it shows that the architecture of the sacred may already be encoded into the brain's deepest layers. Neuroscience speaks of the default mode network, a part of the brain that constructs identity and narrative. In profound meditative or mystical experiences, this network deactivates, producing a boundaryless state of awareness. Could Sidrat al-Muntaha symbolize that threshold, not just cosmologically, but cognitively? The moment when the self dissolves, and all that remains is presence. And there's more. Many misunderstand Sidrat as paradise itself. But the prophet was clear. It is the edge before paradise, not the entry. A pause, not a reward. In sacred geometry, the lot tree stands as the symbolic apex of the tree of life, found not just in Islam but across traditions, from the Bodhi tree in Buddhism to the Sphirot in Kabbalah. It is the vertical axis that holds the cosmos together. When the prophet stood there, he wasn't just witnessing beauty. He was standing at the threshold of divine immediacy, where even metaphor is left behind. No word, no thought, no form could proceed. Just proximity, just presence. A silence so immense, it said everything. QAB Cosine, union without merger. How close can a created being come to the Creator? In the Miraj, we encounter a phrase that captures this mystery with staggering poetic precision. Cab Cosine, or 2 bow lengths away or nearer. It's a moment of ultimate proximity, when the Prophet Muhammad stands before the divine, not in fusion, not in annihilation, but in nearness without blending. This is not about merging with God. It is about approaching the furthest edge of the human soul's capacity to know the divine without crossing into what is uncreated. Islamic theology calls this Balave, without asking how. And this moment defies every intellectual framework. Even the most disciplined philosophers, from Al-Farabi to Ghazali, had about a mystery here. But we're not left without guideposts. Meister Eckhart, a Christian mystic from the 13th century, spoke of a breakthrough where the soul reaches what he called the divine ground, a unity without form, beyond attributes. In his view, the highest spiritual state is not comprehension, but surrender to what cannot be grasped. Sayyid Zarabizadeh's profound work, Mystical Union in Islam, Theosis and Sufi Tradition, 2022, explains how Islamic mysticism doesn't advocate pantheism but speaks of fan, the annihilation of ego, and back, the subsistence of the soul in divine will. The Prophet's experience at Kab Qasain is the pinnacle of this dialectic. He doesn't become God. He doesn't dissolve into light. He remains, and yet he is transformed. Like iron placed in fire, the essence remains but is illuminated by contact. This is where language trembles. No metaphor survives intact. And yet, it is in this moment that the Prophet receives the most intimate revelation, the greeting of peace, the dialogue with the divine. Not in a booming voice or blinding spectacle, but in a communication that transcends speech. In quantum mysticism, such as explored by David Bohm, there's the notion of the implicate order, a hidden field of wholeness where everything is already enfolded into everything else. The Prophet's nearness reflects this reality. Not merging, but mirrored intimacy. Not union in essence, but in will. And still, he returns. He doesn't remain suspended in the clouds of transcendence. He comes back down, carrying with him the weight and wonder of that closeness. That's what makes him the seal, not just of prophets, but of prophetic potential. He touches the divine not for escape, but for embodiment, so that we too might learn that proximity is possible without pretending we can explain it. Neuro Philosophy of the 5 times alignment. Why did the command for prayer come not on earth, but in the heart of the heavens? It's one of the most fascinating details in the story of Isra and Miraj. Every other command in Islam was revealed through Jibril on earth. But the 5 daily prayers, these were given during direct divine communion, the highest point of the Prophet's ascension. That fact alone suggests something critical. Prayer is not just ritual, it's ascension in disguise. At Kab Qasain, in that intimate nearness, the Prophet is gifted not with gold or armies or signs to impress disbelievers, but with a practice, a rhythm, a divine prescription that links the human heart to the cosmic pulse. Dr. Joe Dispenza's research on neuroplasticity shows that when a person engages in repeated, intentional practices, especially those involving mindful movement and stillness, the brain begins to rewire itself. Pathways of anxiety shrink. Circuits of coherence and harmony expand. In this sense, is not only spiritual, it is neurological healing in real time. In their groundbreaking book, The Mystical Mind, Andrew Newberg and Eugene D'Aquila explain that ritual prayer and meditation deactivate the brain's parietal lobe, the part that orients self in space. This creates the sensation of unity with a larger reality. It's no coincidence that Muslims physically align their bodies, hearts, and minds in a singular direction, Qibla, 5 times a day. It's a full system recalibration, a subtle, silent merge of the soul. A common misconception is that Al became obligatory after the Prophet's migration to Medina. In truth, it was mandated during this celestial journey, before Hijra, before the constitution of a Muslim state. That timing reveals its core purpose. Before Islam became a civilization, it was a connection. The foundation wasn't politics. It was prayer. The ethical philosophy behind it is just as profound. Soren Kierkegaard once said, "Prayer does not change God, but it changes the one who prays." The Miraj experience affirms this. The Prophet, after seeing the expanses of heaven and the closeness of divine light, returns with one concrete practice to pass down, a rhythm that aligns the human being not just with time, but with eternity. And that brings us to the real miracle, not that the Prophet ascended, but that we can too, in our own small way, 5 times a day. In every bow, every whisper of Allahu Akbar, we're not just obeying, we're syncing with the cosmic order. We're remembering who we are and who we face. Guided tour of paradise and hell, the near-death data. What does it mean to witness the unseen while still alive? During the Miraj, Prophet Muhammad was not only shown the heavens and their prophets, he was granted visions of paradise and hell. To some, these might sound allegorical, but the Miraj presents them with such vivid, structured detail that they demand a closer look, not just through theology, but through modern cognitive science and comparative eschatology. The prophets saw gardens where rivers flowed beneath trees with golden leaves, homes crafted for the righteous, and peace so palpable it could be felt. He also saw torment, people with copper nails scratching their faces, others being fed molten metal. It's easy to misinterpret these as literal assignments of reward and punishment, but classical tafsir literature, especially the works of Fakhr al-Din al-Razi, emphasizes that these were illustrative, not verdicts. They were symbolic visions meant to educate the soul, not condemn it. Raymond Moody, a pioneer in near-death experience NDE research, gathered hundreds of testimonies from people across cultures who described out-of-body experiences, seeing tunnels of light, meeting beings of compassion, or confronting terrifying reflections of their life's moral weight. In Lessons from the Light by Kenneth Ring, the consistency across reports is striking. Many people experience states of heightened clarity, life review, and symbolic representations of moral choices, much like what the prophet encountered during Miraj. So, are these just neurological hallucinations? Not necessarily. The field of cognitive semiotics, how humans construct meaning from symbols, shows us that archetypal imagery such as gardens, fire, bridges, or ascending ladders appear across religious traditions because they mirror deep structures of human moral cognition. The Miraj used these very forms, not because people needed fear to behave, but because the soul learns through pattern and parable. The Buddhist Avatamsaka Sutra describes multi-layered worlds filled with symbolic gardens and realms of karmic consequence. The Egyptian Book of the Dead speaks of weighing the heart. The Quran too refers to gardens beneath which rivers flow, and to a fire that speaks. All point to the same metaphysical truth. Actions echo, and every soul must one day face its own resonance. So the prophet's tour wasn't just a cosmic sightseeing trip. It was a transmission of truth through imagery, a guided mirror held up to humanity's ethical choices. And here's the insight often missed. He saw all of this and still chose to return. Not out of fear, but because he carried a message. Your life, your choices, your moments, they all matter, and they all echo in realms far beyond what the eye can see. Empirical proofs and epistemic virtues. How do you prove a journey through dimensions? How do you verify something that bends time and space? After the Prophet Muhammad returned from the Miraj, he didn't hold back the story. He told it, every detail. And naturally, the Quraysh, always eager to ridicule, pounced. They called it absurd. A journey from Mecca to Jerusalem, and then through the heavens and back, all in one night? But here's where something unexpected happened. When challenged to describe Masjid Alak, a place he had never visited in this life, the Prophet gave such precise details that the crowd fell silent. This moment, often overlooked, is one of the earliest models of falsifiability in prophetic tradition. Philosopher Karl Popper said that for any claim to be scientific, it must be falsifiable. It must offer a way to test its truth. The Prophet didn't just tell a mystical story. He offered empirical touchpoints, caravan details, the number of camels, the position of a lost water skin, even the exact timing of their arrival. These were not abstract visions. They were markers open to public validation. One by one, each claim was confirmed. Travelers arriving days later attested to the caravan's condition, the exact events described. Abu Bakr, when first hearing the account, didn't hesitate. He said, "If he said it, then it is true." This wasn't blind faith. It was epistemic trust, a trust built on years of unwavering truthfulness. Noam Chomsky's linguistic research supports that honest speech carries different cognitive markers than deceit. Deception carries a heavier cognitive load. The Prophet's words flowed with natural coherence, clarity, and consistency under interrogation, hallmarks of truthful reporting. And there's more. The tradition of verifying miracles and prophetic claims is deeply embedded in Islam. In the Proofs of Prophethood by Imam al-Bayhaqi, recently translated by Zara Press in 2023, we find early Muslim scholars cataloging hundreds of verifiable events tied to the Prophet, treating them not as myth, but as demonstrable signs of a reality that transcends the material but interacts with it. The Miraj, then, isn't just a mystical event suspended in belief. It's part of a tradition of lived, seen, and tested experiences. A cosmic claim tethered to terrestrial proof. A spiritual journey that invites both awe and inquiry. And maybe that's the most powerful lesson. It doesn't ask us to switch off our minds, but to open them wider. Because when faith and evidence meet, certainty deepens, not by bypassing doubt, but by speaking directly through it. From story to state change. What does it mean to return from the stars and still walk with your feet on the ground? After all the celestial encounters, the meetings with prophets, the witnessing of paradise and hell, and the closeness to the divine presence itself, Prophet Muhammad returned to earth. Not because he had to, but because his mission wasn't escape. It was transformation. And that, perhaps, is the most powerful truth hidden in the Isra and Miraj story. The journey didn't end in the heavens. It began there so that earth could be transformed by what he brought back. This is not just a historical event to admire. It's a living model. Laozi once said in the Tao Te Ching, "The way does not contend, yet all things obey it." The prophet's refusal to retaliate against the people of If after such cruelty mirrors this wisdom perfectly. He had tasted the nearness of the divine, yet chose to return with mercy, not might. That is the true measure of ascension, not how far you go, but what you bring back to serve others. The Miraj was a cosmic invitation to calibrate our inner cosmology, to ascend ethically before aspiring to ascend spiritually. This story is not just a record of where the prophet went. It's a call to where we can go within ourselves. In every frustration, in every heartbreak, in every moment where the world pushes you down, you are being offered what transpersonal psychology calls a liminal gateway. A threshold not to despair, but to renewal. The lesser-known yet deeply insightful book Spiritual Body and Celestial Earth by Henry Corbin reminds us that Islamic spirituality never severed the link between the soul's ascension and ethical embodiment. Every heaven the prophet crossed was layered with virtues. Every prophet he met embodied a trait for humanity to cultivate. Miraj, in this light, becomes a spiritual syllabus. So the real question isn't just, what did the prophet see in the seven heavens? It's this: what will you do with the light of that story? Will you install your own mini-night journey through prayer, mindful breath, an act of forgiveness, or a moment of generosity? Because ascension isn't only vertical, it's internal. And the invitation still stands. Tonight, right now. What practice, no matter how small, can you begin today that points you toward your own spiritual sky? What quality will you elevate within yourself before asking to rise beyond yourself? The prophet returned from the stars so we might realize we were never earthbound to begin with.